Sure. Yeah, so, hi all. Yeah, so sorry you got the C team today showing up for you guys. Hope you all don't mind. So if y'all were really excited about data analytics and like some machine learning stuff, I will talk about some of those things, but I am not David Robinson. So I can give you the talk that I can give you. All right, hope y'all are okay with that. So can y'all hear me in the back okay? We good? Awesome. All right, so see, there you go. So just so you all know who I am, I'm Travis Stevenson. I'm a production engineer at Devon Energy. I'm an advising engineer for data and analytics. So that basically means that I actually work for our technology team, but I'm a petroleum engineer. And so 8 years experience at BP, 10 years at Devon. I spent the last 5 years working as a central kind of resource for the company and really helping try to drive our technology group to make sure we're meeting the needs of our operations teams and our production engineering teams, right? So that's what I've been doing for the last 5 years. A lot of what we're going to talk today is kind of talk about through my experience and kind of Devon's journey in the production analytics space. But just real quick, I actually was telling Aaron, I actually just joined the API about 36 hours ago. So I've been using the API's documentation and standards for years. Really appreciate what they did. Actually, technically, the API actually took that picture as part of like an industry kind of emissions thing. So really good photographers at the API. I really appreciate that because they had to work with this, and that was actually a decent picture. But just so I kind of get an understanding of the room and we can kind of tailor the conversation. So how many in the room are engineering consultants? All right, okay, excellent. How many are service providers? Okay, awesome. How many of your service providers have a digital component to what you do? Okay, awesome. How many are operators? All right, and of the operators, how many are working inside of the kind of production space? Awesome. I sat at the right table. Excellent. That's really good. So, all right, so today we're going to talk about, as the kind of title was talking about, is kind of getting real with production analytics. So I'm not going to get political or anything like that, but I was a Rush Limbaugh fan when he was alive, and I really liked his saying, the mayor of Reelsville. I'm going to try to be that for everyone here today. Right? We're talking about the reality of what it looks like as an E&P company, especially an E&P company with some scale, as Devon Energy is, of what it looks like doing production analytics and making that part of what you do, right? So obviously, you have a lot of more folks on the service side than on the operation side. This will give you all some questions you can ask, right? To say, hey, I got this great thing. Are we as operators ready for that, right? And how can you be the most successful as you can working with us? And as operators, how do we ask ourselves the right question and our providers the right question so that we're all kind of on the same page and we're working together, right? So we're going to kind of ask ourselves 3 questions today. And as you can see, I move around a lot. If you guys have questions during it, just raise your hand. We can talk through it. We can have a conversation. We also have a Q&A at the end. But really, the kind of questions we have to ask is, because everyone wants to talk about analytics and production analytics specifically because there's a huge amount of value there. But the kind of question we have to ask is, like, is your company actually ready to utilize the analytics, right? And I mean that not just from a technology stack perspective, that we will talk about that a lot, but from a leadership perspective, from a organizational perspective, from a people in the right places perspective. There's a whole lot of the conversations will be around that today. Right, then, cool, you're ready, that's awesome. Like, who's the audience for your analytic? Because I can tell you that if you're giving an analytic to a lease operator, that's a different animal than you're giving it to a production engineer, different animal than giving it to a foreman, right? There's different ways you have to look at. So understanding the audience you're talking to, and are you solving a problem they actually even care about, right? Is it really adding business value, right? Because I can tell you as an engineer, I think a lot of things are really cool, but that doesn't really move the needle, right? So then, all right, cool. We have those two solved. What does success look like, right? So, one more time, John, right? So, as a data scientist, right? So, when you say, "Hey, I got this great model, it's awesome." Well, what does that look? What does good look like, right? We have to really understand that problem really, really well, and we have to be able to kind of talk through really some kind of analytical statistics to really be able to do that, right? So, you all put up with me. I'm going to go through this, but it's because as a pyramid is going to look kind of consultant, I hope you all will put up with that a little bit, but it kind of helps explain some stuff, right? So So who looked immediately to the top of that pyramid and saw the red analytics and was like, yeah, let's look at that first? Anybody? No one's going to admit that? Okay, I know I did. We all want to talk about data analytics and tools, but we're not willing to really acknowledge that's really the top of the pyramid of value. And we have to be able to talk about, the base and what holds that up, right? Because if we don't have the ability to actually have data capture and actually get the data where it needs to go, or have the ability to have the infrastructure and the data architecture to make it work, and the data management and the tools, the analytics are going to either fall flat from even if it's a great analytic, it might fall flat from the standpoint of people aren't ready for it, but it also just might not have all the supporting data to make it work, right? So we're going to kind of go through this pyramid a little bit and kind of walk you through what I mean by that and kind of what Devin has done, right? So I'll be as open as I can here within this space of friends, right? But we'll kind of walk you through what Devin has done. If you want any more clarity on anything, please just kind of let me know as I go if you want to know about any of this stuff. So we'll kind of start with like the least sexy part, right? Actually, the bottom two in general kind of are not very sexy, but they're really, really important. So data capture or telemetry, right? So whether we're talking about like real-time analytics, and at times we kind of think production analytics is synonymous with like finding a tank leak or trying to find like a line spike or something like that with real-time data. Well, that's important, right? But there's also analytics around production, just looking at regular production data, looking for decline and things like that. But there's also like work in process data, right? So these steps are the same whether we're talking about like looking at the coolest sensor in the world, or we're talking about understanding, have I fixed that dump valve 20 times this month? Because we find that sometimes, right? And so kind of the questions to ask ourselves, right? Be a whole lot of questions here, right? So if you want to do analytics, great. Table stakes obviously is, do you have sensors installed? And are they installed consistently? And are they standardized so that value that you're reading here is the same as that value that you're reading here, and you can actually make heads or tails of that? Are you actually measuring the points that you need, right? I mean, I think that we had a vision of what you would need in years past. Let me know. In years past, but I think we've kind of grown in that. So I think a lot of our old sites might, a real simple example would be, from a regulatory perspective, you kind of have to measure your heater to your temperature. Are you actually doing that? Or are you counting on somebody walking by and writing that down every day, right? If you don't have the data to use, you can't do an analytic off of it, right? And then are you actually connecting all your sensor data to your SCADA system, right? So, there's a plethora of stuff. If you go to the PLC on location and you try to look at all the data you're actually capturing, great. Is it getting to where you can actually do something with it, or is it all just living on site, right? So then production data, right? Do you have an allocation system that you trust, right? I'm sure we're all going to nod our heads up and down and say, yep, our allocations are great all the time because that's how we pay people, right? But really, do you trust that data that you're getting at there, right? Do you have consistent entry by your operators? Does it require data entry by your operators, right? How good's that downtime number? Do you trust it, right? Because you're going to need all of that if you're going to use the production data. And then from a work process perspective, right? Do you actually have a system to capture your work, right? Whenever you send someone out to go fix that dump valve, is it a text message? Is it a Teams message? Is it an email? Is it some sort of like unstructured data? Or do you actually have something that says, hey, I need John to go over and fix the dump valve, and I have a piece of data. I'm going to keep picking on you the whole time because you're right there. I appreciate that, John. Do you have those systems in place, right? And then do you actually have equipment to go with it? And really, is it any good, right? So those are kind of the table stakes for if you want to get to the analytics of these things, like do you actually have these things? Because it isn't free. It doesn't just happen. Communications and infrastructure, right? So from a real-time perspective, like, do you actually have the comms? Great, you have the sensors. You have it all mapped right. Well, that's awesome. Do you have a comms network that's going to bring that in reliably so you can actually use it? Do you get data at once a day frequency? You can't do much with that, right? Once an hour frequency, still pretty hard to do something with that, right? What are you going to do? Like, what are you actually getting out of that data? Are you getting it? Do you own your network? Because that's a big investment. Using somebody else's network, less investment, still a lot of hand-holding, right? Are you in control of that? Because your analytics are only going to be as good as the data you have coming in, and we find over and over again, hey, I can do this great thing, but oh, my comms are down. Well, who cares, right? So production data, right? Is your data accessible? Is your data only available inside of, some, ad hoc program you have to go open up, or is it actually available in a real database that you can go get to it, right? Do you have a data warehouse, right? Can you actually put that allocated data or cost data, whatever you want, kind of business intelligence data, is it some place that you can actually use it and access it? Do you have the infrastructure to actually utilize that data in your analytic? So as an example here for Devin, we're a big Snowflake customer. I'll be transparent with you guys on that, right? So we've spent a lot of time and money ensuring that we have, and I can tell you from here, Devin, we own our infrastructure, right? We own our comms networks. And so that's not cheap. We have effectively a whole, wireless company inside of Devin. There's only a few people, but they've spent a lot of time and money doing that. It's not cheap to be able to do that, but it allows us to get there, right? And then, from a work perspective, right? Do you have a data warehouse for this, right? I'm going to say this over and over again. Like, do you actually? It's great that you have data, but if you have it only in programs, it's locked up, right? Do you have that in a place you can actually use it, right? So I would say that it's not sexy to talk about, as a production engineer. I want to talk about rod pumps. I want to talk about ESPs. I talk a whole lot about where am I storing my data and how do I access it? What table structure is it in? Because if I can't use it and get to it, it's meaningless to me, right? And then from can you enrich that data set, right? You can't, have every piece of data on everything. Can I enrich my work management or my production or my real-time data? Can I enrich that data with other things like the API number and stuff like that? You need to be able to organize the information. Okay, moving up the ladder. This is actually normally the least sexy of all the three at the bottom, right? But it's really, really important. We were actually just talking about a second ago. It's like the data quality, like data management, right? So for real-time data, right? It's awesome to have that stream. So now I have the data captured. I'm streaming it in. Oops, my gas meter is flatlined because it's locked up, right? I have ice. No one actually maintained that sensor, and as a result, I'm getting no data, right? And so I don't know that, and especially as folks that are actually providing data to people, they're calling you and they're mad why is this flatline for me, right? But the reality is, it's because the automation guy didn't do the maintenance, right? But still, they just see it because it came through your system, right? So from a real-time perspective, do you have the data quality? Do you have the ability to actually use your data on an analytical basis, not a visual basis, where I can actually just open it up and go, flatlined, whatever, I'm going to keep moving forward. But if we're talking about analytics, we're saying, I want a machine to do this for me. Okay, the machine doesn't know that. How do you ensure that the data that it is using is of good quality? And do you actually maintain those things? Second it's kind of the same drum over and over again here, right? From a production data quality, do I have data quality rules, right? Once again, no one thinks that's a fun thing to talk about, but it's really, really important. If you want to do anything with your data, it has to be clean data, right? And that likely means having some level of an organization around whose responsibility it is to do that, right? That's not a technology problem, that is normally a people problem in ensuring that you actually have processes to ensure that things actually get done in a meaningful way. Once again, that's not a fun analytical conversation, but if you want to get to that point, you have to be willing to do those things. All right. Okay, now we're getting more fun, right? We're talking about tools. Awesome. So from a real-time perspective, do I actually have now that I have all this data, I spent the time and the money to be able to see it and use it. Well, can I see it, right? Is it really, really good data that I have to ad hoc trend one thing at a time and build my trend over and over and over again? I'm not picking on any certain software program, but you know what I'm talking about, right? Any operators in the room? I got real-time data. It's great quality, but I can't do anything with it, right? So do I have the tools so that we are actually able to use this data? Because also, I'm going to keep picking on John, if we want people to create a great analytical model, well, they have to understand that data pretty well, which means they have to be familiar with it and are practitioners in using that data so they can help really smart people create really good analytics. Because, reality is going to be is not everybody can do everything, right? We are very lucky that we have the guy who's going to talk to you, David Robinson's actually a petroleum engineer by training, then became a data scientist. That's a really great combo for us because I don't have to explain what a rod pump is, right? So do we have, once again, Do we have consistent production reporting tools, right? Once again, not a sexy concept to talk about. But if we're all scrambling to know what the right actual production today is, we're not going to get past that and get to where we're actually saying, oh, I can tell you that I have frac interference here, or I have a little bit of water interference over here. We're not going to get to that place if we're not kind of looking at the same information. Right, and then from a tool perspective, do we actually have, from a work process perspective, if we're going to look at work analytics? So if I want to understand, hey, we fixed that dump valve or turned that compressor on 20 times this week. If I want to know that, am I expecting that guy to go into his truck, open up something that looks like it's from the 1940s and type a bunch of stuff in, or 1990s, right? I'm not going to tell you what program that is, but I'll tell you that we use SAP. And so there's a lot of great things there that, like, as Devon, to understand how we've gotten to that place, we've created a whole set of, like, we're using a base system, SAP, to do our work management, right? So our work orders, our dispatches. However, we're using a front end to make the user experience better so that if I'm asking someone to go do something and capture data for me, it doesn't suck, right? Someone can actually go and say, yeah, I went out there, I completed my work, and that now is part of the record. It's seamless. He doesn't have to call anybody else anymore, right? So the question is, if you want to do these things and you want to get to this place, right, you can't just think about the outcome, but also, like, who's the inputs and how do I ensure that that actually is good for them, right? Because if it's not good for them, it's not going to be good for you in the long run. Okay? And now, cool, top of the pyramid. We made it. Awesome. So now that we have all this information, right, and I'm going to tell you that they're asking a second ago, you know, what's our next step at Devon, right? Because I tell you, Devon's at different phases of this pyramid in different spots of our operation. I'm going to be transparent with you all, right? Either via acquisition or just different setups, right? I can't tell you that all of us are at the very top of the pyramid, but I can tell you that we're all trying to level set using this architecture and this kind of framework of thought to ensure that we are getting there and able to use it. But really make sure that we have, you know, what problems do you actually need to solve, right? As I told you before, as a production engineer, there's a lot of really cool things we can do, but is it really driving the needle, right? Is that really actually a problem, or is it something that I can just happen to be able to figure out with data, right? Am I solving the problems that actually need to be solved, right? And do we have the data experience to solve them, right? So cool, you have the technology, you have the data, but do you have people that know how to actually put those things together? That's an investment. That's a lot of time, a lot of effort, right? Are you putting the right people in the right place to actually do those things? Right? And do you know your customer? Because I can tell you right now, which kind of joked with Aaron a second ago, like, even though I work for an operator, I'm in sales too, because I'm having to sell this to my teams in the field. Do I actually know them? Like, can they call me? Can I talk to them? Can we work through this process together? Because now, you know, once you're delivering any kind of an analytic, you are selling something to them, right? So do we know their customer, right? And, like, does my customer know what to do with that output, right? So great. I gave them a confidence rating of 85% something's happening. Do they know what the hell I'm talking about, right? Are we getting ourselves there? So, I said, a lot of questions, but let me give you an example, right? So here's what Devon has done from a real-time data perspective. So working that pyramid, right? So, you know, data, when I say here data collection and transmission, that's what I'm saying. It's us installing sensors on location, installing automation on location, and installing a comms network to ensure we can actually get that data in. Data available to use, data management, that is us utilizing, we are a PI asset framework shop, so that's contextualizing our real-time data in a way that we can actually use it, right? It's great to have real-time data, but if it's not consistent and it's not organized, you really can't use it. Data visualization, we are also a PI vision shop. That is us creating the visualizations that we actually let people say, I want to see what the data is really doing in a consistent, scalable way. Simple exceptions, hey, I want to bring up every time the tank level's at over 15 feet. I want to know about that. Cool, we can do that, right? But that took work to get to. Then we get to logic-based exceptions. Hey, if this and this and this is happening, we actually have an analytic that does that where we find tank leaks. Great, multi-level logical exceptions. And then machine learning. And as you notice, as we kind of go over here, we have potential value because it's awesome to have the data, but the value, you know, isn't that high if it's just that's all you have, right? My value is going to go up, my technical complexity is also going to increase, right? So, you know, to kind of give you an example of that, this is what Devon's done, So that pre-2017, I mean way pre-2017. Like Devin's been putting, Devin's been putting a lot of time and effort into that for a very, very long time. And we spent a lot of money on that. So it was a lot of effort there. You know, data available to use was a long process. So we worked our way up to where we're now, you know, this is, 5-6 years. We've spent a very concerted effort to where we're just now getting to the place where we can actually do our data science modeling and doing some really neat things that David was going to talk to you all about, but you're stuck with me. Sorry about that. Okay, so 1 point down and not a whole lot of time left to go. I'm gonna hurry up. So next question, right? So who's your audience, right? Just some questions, right? So if you're making an analytic, it's to do something, right? It's to drive an outcome. Normally for someone to do something, right? Whether it's replace something or it's to make a change or set point, something like that. Like, do they actually care about the problem, right? Is your solution actually better than what they do now? Because sometimes it's not, right? Do you have like an intelligible amount of time? Do they actually understand and have the time to actually look at that? And great, they've done it, but some of it's not going to be right. Does your operations staff, if you're going to give them an analytic, do they have a feedback loop so that they can help you get better? Otherwise, they're just going to deal with all the garbage that you're sending them. You want to give it to an engineer? Awesome. Beware, but awesome. Right? You know, does it actually drive value for them? Or once again, do you just think it's cool? Right? Do they actually, know it's part of their job to do? Right? That's a problem at sometimes. Do they actually have the time to look? But then the biggest thing for the engineer is, great, I found something. Is there a way that they can get into the operational workflow? Right? And once again, if that's a text message or a Teams message, that's fine. But is there a way for the person, if you're centralizing who's looking at that information, can they actually get into the workflow and make it actually happen? Okay. So now we're talking about what success looks like. And so we're going to get kind of nerdy here. Hope you all don't mind if you haven't been nerdy enough already. But I'm going to give you all an example, right? So this is a fictitious but realistic example of a field that Devin has. Once again, the numbers are not exactly real. We haven't had 100 take leaks, but it makes the math a lot easier for me. Hope you don't mind. So let's say we have a field that has 2,000 tanks, and we have 100 tank leaks a year. All right, that's a lot of tank leaks. Right? You're going to care about that because on any given day, that's like a 25% chance that I'm going to find a leak. I'm going to put someone looking for those things so that I can respond quickly because I want to be a good operator, right? I want to ensure that I'm being a good environmental steward. But if I do the probability on that, any given tank on any given day has a 0.01% chance of actually having a leak, right? So what I'll say is a real quick note to the folks who sell things in the room. It's going to be really hard for me to justify buying a special super duper sensor for that tank to find the leak because that's a 0.01% chance on any given day that I'm going to find that thing, right? It's also going to make the trials really hard because if I put it on a quarter of my tanks for half a year, I only have like a 25% chance I'm actually going to find a leak, right? So just once again, thinking about this at scale is really important, and we're really getting into needle in a haystack territory. Even for a problem that's really, really big, it's still a needle in a haystack from a data perspective, right? So that's when we have to start breaking out some like analytical statistics. Don't freak out. A couple equations here, but I actually, even though I'm an engineer, I don't like math that much. So we're going to talk a little bit about this, call it the confusion matrix. You have to understand, when you talk to someone who's a data scientist, they're going to want to talk about accuracy or precision and recall, especially if you're selling something, you're going to talk about accuracy a whole lot. I'm going to explain why you don't really care about that number very much, but we'll get to that in a second. But don't worry about this for a second because I much want to talk about fishing. About to go to fishing? Who likes to fish crappie? Right? Just two? Come on, we're in the oil field here. All right, more. All right, so it's spawning season right now, right? Or pretty close, right? So are you going to catch a crappie in the middle of the pond? Maybe your pond, but not you. Okay, it has happened. Okay, is there a high likelihood you're going to catch a crappie in the middle of a big pond or a big lake? In Lake Eufaula, am I catch it in the middle? No. Right? I might look around a pond and try to find the fish, but I'm going to find them by the dock, right? Okay. So I promise you I'm going somewhere with this. So, I could have asked you maybe you kind of told me I could fish in the middle of the lake. I'll ask you. You said back I couldn't catch it. I had to go find a dock or a sunken tree or something like that. I can get some experience and I can find that, but I'm not going to catch a fish anywhere but where fish are, right? And I either have to find that through experience or asking someone else their experience, right? And so I can get, once I figure that out, I can get and hopefully at this point you guys know I'm talking about data and finding stuff in the data, right? We're on the same page now. So I can get a bigger fishing pole, a better tool, right? I can get, a really fancy fishing pole, right? I can get it sonar to see where the fish are. I can go take night classes. But no matter what, I can only actually catch this fish if I am fishing, and I can catch it one at a time, right? Just one at a time. What if I have to find a lot more than that, right? So what if, obviously, my fish are tank leaks, right? And I want to find them. I'm probably going to need a net, right? Not a fishing pole, right? So that's the difference between someone looking at your data in a tool or the tool finding things for you. And so I might need a net like this, or I might need a net that looks like this. And to know what kind of net I need to understand those things that before look kind of weird. So let's talk about analytics for a real quick second, but from a perspective of fishing, right? So a true positive means I caught a fish in my net. Woo! Awesome, right? Obviously, the net is my analytic that I used. False positive, I caught a boot or a beer can in my net. Wasn't going for that. False negative is a fish that I missed. True negative is no nets and no fish. And that's actually a really important thing, right? Because in that pond, there's a whole lot of no fish in water, right? And so if I want to understand this, right, I want to talk about accuracy, all that's doing is saying I'm adding up my true positives, my true negatives, and everything else. And so I can have a high accuracy if I'm just in the ballpark, right? As long as I'm not putting 20 people out there fishing every part of the pond, because I went to the middle because we talked earlier and I went to the middle of the pond. I'm sorry about that. But as long as I'm fishing in generally the right spot, I'm going to have a very accurate model for production analytics, simply because there's so much data to look at and so many things. Because once again, remember that's 0.01% chance. As long as I'm not triggering on every tank every day, I'm probably doing pretty good from an accuracy perspective. High precision, I caught only the fish that I wanted, right? So true positives divided by false positives, true positives, and great. I put my net in the water, I only caught the fish I was looking for. That's great. It's a high precision model. Now, the question you got to ask, because that's a really easy net to use, it's probably pretty small, probably pretty fast from a data perspective. But the question I got to ask is, what happens if I miss a fish? Is that a problem? If it's a rod pump optimization, probably not. If it's an ESP thing, maybe. If it's an environmental, it's probably a big problem that I missed something, right? Especially if I'm relying on my analytic to do work for me now. What about this net, a high recall net? Cool, now we're catching some stuff. So true positive, false negative, or true positive, right? So bigger net, it's gonna be harder to use, right? But I'm gonna catch more stuff. But the question is gonna be here is, I'm gonna catch all the fish I'm looking for with a high recall model, but how hard is it to actually sort out the beer cans and the boots and stuff like that? And I might catch other fish I wasn't expecting to catch, which that could be good, that could be bad, I don't know. But if we're talking about these things, like whenever we're in needle in a haystack territory with data, as people providing an analytic or as a consumer of an analytic, we have to have a much more nuanced understanding of these metrics. So I'll give you an example here, right? So what if I had an analytic that returned 5 results a day, right? And it caught 95 leaks. Cool. Well, 5 results a day means I caught 95 of them. That's still 1,725 false positives. Okay, that doesn't sound great. False negatives, 5, I missed 5. And then true negatives, because I just wasn't going off all the time, I got 728,000 something true negatives. Well, great. Put those in the numbers. That accuracy, even though, man, I'm hardly ever actually finding a leak with this analytic by the numbers. That's a 99.8% accuracy, right? If you're selling an analytic, you're going to say that a lot, right? And as a customer, you're going to say, well, what the heck? Why am I not getting what I wanted? So accuracy, not super useful metric, even though we use it intuitively all the time as an engineer, not super great with these kind of analytics. Precision, 5%. That doesn't sound great, right? Recall's pretty good, 95%. right? So is this a success or not? The engineer in me says, well, you have a whole bunch of false positives, but like, really, what am I trying to solve? I'm trying to find leaks in a field with a whole lot of tanks. Is it successful or not? Let's think about it. So if I actually have, an analytic, so if I was doing this manually, let's say I have a pretty decent real-time tool where I could actually go look at every tank level every day, and it took about 5 seconds to look at each well, each tank, right? For 2,000 wells, that's 1,000 man-hours a year of spent just mind-numbingly, soul-crushingly looking at tanks just to see, did they drop? But with that 1,800 analytics, spent 2 minutes looking at each one of them, that's only 60 man-hours a year. That's a 94% efficiency gain that my guys can do something else, right? Especially if I happen to have good real-time data and I have cameras in the field, which Devin has spent a lot of money on cameras, where they can go, let me go look at the tank. Oh, no, it's not that. So they can spend 2 minutes investigating that, and I'm going to get a whole lot of improvement. But what if you have that analytic, but the next step is send somebody out there and go look? Okay, well, that's a 1 hour site visit. That's an 80% efficiency loss, right? So really, understanding, is the analytic good? Is it bad? Does it do me any good? Is understanding what's my investigation cost? How much does it cost me to do that? And by the way, getting the investigation cost down costs money, right? It's going to cost sensors. It's going to cost cameras. It's going to cost a lot of stuff. But you can see here there's pretty big wins here. So let's wrap it up, because I know I'm now past time. All right, so is your company ready, right? Remember, the pre-work isn't trivial, right? But there's value every step along the way. Who's the audience, right? Different groups are going to need different things. And, they're going to need a path back. By path back means path back into a workflow to get something actually done, or path back into the analytical workflow to make sure it's a better thing. And then, what does success look like? Depends completely on the, what's the gravity of missing that event? Is it okay if I miss it or not? Or what does it cost me to investigate? And with this one in particular, this is much of a leadership exercise and change management exercise as it is anything to do with technology. Getting people used to realizing that they're going to find literally 5% of the time I click that button, I find a real problem, but it's still better than what you're doing. That's a mindset shift and a leadership challenge for you all in the room and people that work for you to get that across the finish line. But anyway, I've now talked at you long enough. If you have any questions for me, let me know.
I got a question.
Yeah.
What's the process like for integrating all your acquisitions? So Devin's done a lot recently, and sometimes you might buy stuff that has great data sensors, and sometimes you have none, or how do you just?
Yeah, so that depends. I'd say we've had different flavors of that. We have gone as far in some places of saying we're tearing out what you got, putting our stuff in. That's kind of a hard approach to take. We've done a pretty good job of saying, well, what's similar? What can we tweak? And then generally, from a sensor perspective, we will tweak, but from a architecture perspective, we will say, this is how Devin does it, and we change the architecture to fit into our bigger system.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
On your base layer of your hierarchy, you said the data capture isn't quite as sexy to you at the top, of your hierarchy, but don't you see AI coming on board? Some of that stuff will already be onboarded into your capture.
Sure.
And so that'll get me. Is that where you're seeing some of the things that you wish all your data had, that the industry just hasn't found the equipment yet
Absolutely.
to be able to add to our our production side?
I think there's a level of AI, but I think honestly the data entry component is probably more than anything, it's a integration problem, right? Because I know if that well's down. I have the real-time data that says it's down. It's to get that real-time data that says, hey, I'm down, and then have that put in the downtime number for me automatically. That's the integration part that I think is a bigger problem. And then my tank levels and things like that for production data entry. I have that data. It's getting that where it needs to go. And Devin has spent a lot of money and a lot of money and time ensuring that we say, hey, I don't want someone just going to location to write a tank level down, right? I want to have that streaming in. I want to know that. I want my meters to come in automatically. We spend a lot of time and effort to ensure that we have the data capture, but it doesn't take that much time. I think that the AI will come into play when it's like, hey, I just know I need to record this. I'm not sure what system it's going to go into, so I'm going to tell you that, hey, I'm not normally here.
Some of those logical choices you're talking about
Yeah.
already be written in.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So there's a whole lot of neat things in that space, but kind of like the thing, I wouldn't look so far at the top of that pyramid or the sexiness of that and say it's just going to fix all my problems. If you don't have good underlying structures, it's just going to give you weird answers. Yes, sir.
So, looking at it from a couple of different perspectives, from the operator standpoint
Mm-hmm.
and from the service company standpoint,
Absolutely.
I can see that the processes could work equally well in their respective silos.
Yes, sir.
Although we all know that people like Devin work with service providers who provide equipment, and the performance of that equipment from both sides need to perform right.
Yes, sir.
So the service companies are looking at data for the equipment that they're providing, and the operators are looking at the equipment that their service companies are providing, but they may have different sort of structures, and so how do you,
Absolutely.
your comments on how that integrates together, because they both want to win.
Absolutely, and the cool thing about that is we want you to win and you want us to win. It's not we want to win mutually exclusively, right? So what I'd say is I can tell you how we've handled that, because what you're really talking about to kind of encapsulate it is third-party data capture. Whether that is me getting data from you or you getting data from me, that's some kind of a warehouse that we can both pull off of. And I can tell you, man, if that existed today, I'd buy it, but it doesn't. And so how that's happened for us is we have had some bespoke solutions for different problems, like say chemicals and things like that, where we partner with companies that do that data transfer. But right now it has to do a whole lot to do with an integration on our part with you, if we wanted to do that, or some kind of like way that we mesh those things together, where you're translating from us, we're translating from you. That's not a great solution. What I would say, that's a pretty good opportunity for anybody that wanted to find a niche in the digital industry, would be to do that, because I think there's a need for that as well. Because the thing is I'll expand a second, because I know you guys, artificial lift sales company, like there's a whole lot of things that like it's great that we get from y'all or any company like y'all. It's like, hey, I got this great dashboard that shows you how to see all the things in my stuff. That's cool. I'm still gonna buy the pump I need to buy, right? And so the digital component's not gonna be at least for us, not a huge driver for that. However, if you can capture failure data for me and send it back to me, right? And we can start trading data back and forth across an ecosystem. That becomes a really, really interesting proposition. I'm giving a talk at the SPE conference, just to plug for that, next week. I'll be talking a little bit about that whole concept there. There's a lot of opportunity there. Yes, sir.
So it's Devin out to where you can use this data analytics to manage by exception.
Yep.
You know, in other words, some flag goes off saying, hey, this well should have been this, but it was not.
Sure.
yesterday.
So I'll tell you where we are at different spaces and different places, right? Not to make them rhyme, but we're different. But there are certain areas where 100% they are not going to every well every day. They are letting the data tell them where to go, and they are letting. And the cool thing about that is not just using real-time data, but that's using our production data, and it's using our work management data to understand, hey, there's a minimum requirement of being here to ensure that we are a good operator, but where we want to make sure that we're there as least often as is safe, right? And so that's an integration of, hey, if someone's gone out there to change the dump valve, well, we expect them to walk around the site and make sure everything's okay. I cannot go there today because I know someone's been there, right? So I'd say that we're at a gradient of that across Devon, but that is definitely the goal, so that we are, setting some level of threshold for minimum visits, so that we are being good operators, ensuring we're not missing anything that our data can't catch, because we're not, as I showed you before, that wasn't a perfect analytic. We're not going to be perfect, but how do we ensure that we're balancing the risk reward of that in a responsible way? And we're definitely moving in that direction pretty much across the board. So does that answer your question, Joe?
Yeah.
All right, excellent. Yeah, and once again, Devon's got, we have 5 basins we're in, pretty big footprint, so it's a little different places. And I would say, kind of as we talk through that pyramid, right, we really have to do all of those steps. Smaller operations might not have to do quite the same thing, but probably the same themes need to be addressed. Yes, sir.
So how's the security and privacy on this stuff? I mean, you're transmitting all of this, whether it be through wireless communication or whatever. How's that feel? I mean, are you seeing any issues with anybody getting into your data or anything getting corrupted?
Oh, okay. So there's kind of two parts to that, right? One is, are people getting to my data? And the other part is, am I looking at something I shouldn't look on somebody else's? Is that kind of the two parts of that? Yeah. So on the security part, we work very, very closely with our security team to ensure that that does not happen, right? So we do have some data that is externally available, but you have to have the right credentials, and we have kind of those things worked out. I feel very, very confident that while I can't speak to it super intelligently, that our security team has that covered, especially when it comes to the things that you could get that could mess us up, i.e. our control. That's locked away in a really tight box, right? But now people, like that actually opens up a really interesting thing that we wrestle with, because we know people are in the trucks, right? We have a lot of those things. So the question kind of comes in, well, it's a Devon truck. I can know where you are, right? And so we try to manage that via like, hey, let's ensure that people that really need to know from a safety perspective, like their leaders, know where they are, right? So, but I would love to tell you that we have all of that licked. We don't. We're still having conversations about, hey, it'd be really, really useful for me to know where you are so I could dispatch you more work. But also, kind of conversely, I think the more powerful thing is I want you to know when you walk on location what work there is to do or what alerts are happening, and that's where we can use your data without even sharing it with anybody, but letting that data benefit you and make you a better operator. Does that make sense? So it's not by no means I can't give you a black and white answer to that, but I can tell you it's something that we're trying to make sure we're making a responsible decision on. All right. Thank you all for having me. Thanks.
Very good.
Thank you, Travis. That's a really good presentation from a self-proclaimed C-team speaker. Good job. Thanks so much. Our next meeting will be Thursday, May 11th. That is our last meeting for this year for us. We pick it up again in the fall. So hope to see you all next month, and thank you for coming.